Ellie Calloway's father slapped the pen out of her hand so hard it cracked against the wall. "Sign it, or sleep in the dirt tonight, you and those brats!" Her 5-year-old screamed. Her 8-year-old stepped between them, fists balled, shaking. Ellie picked up the pen from the floor with bleeding fingers. She didn't look at her father. She looked at her daughters. 2 girls, no money, no home, no one coming to save them. She signed her name to a contract that would ship all 3 of them to a stranger in the mountains, a man who didn't know they existed. Before we go any further into Ellie's story, I want to ask you something from the bottom of my heart. If you believe a child should never be thrown away, hit that subscribe button right now and tell me what city you're watching from today. Because this is a story about a woman who was thrown away and the man who found her worth when everyone else had decided she was nothing. Now, let's step back to where it all began. It started with the letters. Colonel Horace Calloway had been writing to a rancher in Montana Territory for 3 months. Beautiful letters full of poetry, charm, promises about a refined young widow with no children, and a gentle voice suited for frontier life. Margaret, his eldest daughter, had written every word. Ellie hadn't seen a single one. "Read it yourself if you don't believe me," Calloway said, tossing the contract across the desk. Ellie picked it up. Her hands were still shaking from the slap. The contract said she was 25, childless, educated, and eager to start a new life out west. It said she had a pleasant disposition and no family complications. "I'm 29. The stutter caught on the number. It always came when he raised his voice. "I have 2 daughters, and Margaret wrote these letters, not me. Details." Calloway poured bourbon. It was 10 in the morning. "By the time this Bridger fellow figures out the truth, you'll be snowed in for winter. Can't send you back. And maybe by spring you'll have made yourself useful enough to keep. Or maybe he throws you out in the snow. Then that's your problem, not mine." Josie stood in the doorway, her arm around Annie. 8 years old and already standing like a woman twice her age. Annie had her face buried in her sister's shoulder, trembling. "Mama, what's happening?" "Nothing, baby. Go wait in the hall." "Don't lie to her, Eleanor." Calloway didn't even look at the girls. "Tell her the truth. Tell her you're leaving because you're too stupid and too broken to be worth keeping." Josie's chin came up. "Mama's not stupid." "Josie, go." "She's not. You're a liar and a mean old man, and I hate you." Calloway moved fast for a drunk. He crossed the room in 2 steps, hand raised. Ellie was faster. She put herself between her father and her daughter, caught his wrist, and held it. No stutter this time. "Touch her, and I will kill you." Something in her voice made him stop. Not fear, recognition. She'd pushed him past the edge, and he knew it. He pulled his wrist free. "Get out of my house, all 3 of you. Stage leaves at dawn." That night, Ellie sat on the bare floor of her empty room. Her father had already sold the furniture, the bed, the dresser, her mother's rocking chair. Gone, all of it. Josie and Annie slept curled together on a folded blanket. Annie's rag doll was clutched against her chest. Josie's hand rested on her sister's hair, protective even in sleep. Ellie opened the carpet bag and started making choices. 3 changes of clothes for each of them. Her mother's cameo brooch, a tin of dried herbs, a sewing kit. Her hand found the letter at the bottom of the drawer. Edwin's letter. Written before the drinking, before the gambling, before he stumbled into a mine shaft at 3 in the morning and never came out. She held it for a long time. Josie's voice came from the dark. "Are you bringing Daddy's letter? I thought you were asleep. Why are you bringing it? He was mean to us, too." Ellie folded the letter carefully. "Because he wasn't always mean. And I need to remember that people can start good, even if they don't finish that way. Is the man in Montana going to be mean? I don't know. What if he doesn't want us? Then we figure out something else. What if there isn't something else?" Ellie put the letter in the bag, closed it, and lay down next to her daughters. She pulled Annie close. The child whimpered, but didn't wake. "There's always something else, Josie. You just have to be brave enough to find it." "I'm tired of being brave." "Me too, baby. Me too." The train rattled west for 4 days. Tennessee dissolved into Kansas. Kansas dissolved into nothing but grass and sky and the endless clatter of wheels on iron. Annie stopped eating on the 2nd day. She just sat in Ellie's lap, silent. her rag doll pressed against her mouth. Josie watched the window and wrote in her journal, the stubby pencil moving in careful letters Ellie had taught her. On the third night, Annie woke up screaming. The whole car turned to stare. A man in a conductor's uniform hurried over. "Ma'am, you need to quiet that child. She's having a nightmare." The stutter came. "Strange men, authority, same trigger every time. She'll settle down. Other passengers are trying to sleep. Then they can sleep somewhere else." Ellie pulled Annie against her chest, rocking her, humming the song her mother used to sing, the one about rivers and going home. Annie's screams faded to whimpers, then silence. Josie hadn't moved from her seat, but her hand reached across and found Ellie's in the dark, squeezed hard. "Mama, we're going to be okay." Ellie squeezed back. "Yes, we are." She didn't believe it, but she said it because that's what mothers do. They lie about the future so their children aren't afraid of it. Cheyenne was chaos. Ellie held both girls' hands and pushed through the crowd to the stagecoach office. "Bridger's Ranch," she told the clerk. "How do I get there?" "Stage runs to Elkhorn tomorrow morning. From there it's 7 miles up into the mountains. Bridger don't come to town." The clerk looked at the girls. "You might try the general store in Elkhorn. Ada Brennan runs it. She knows everybody." The stagecoach ride was 2 days of dust and rattling. Annie got sick twice. Josie held her sister's hair and didn't say a word. Elkhorn was barely a town. A general store, a blacksmith, a saloon, a handful of rough buildings, and a small white church with a crooked steeple. The store belonged to Ada Brennan. Tall, weathered, with hands that had buried 2 husbands and built a business without either of them. She took one look at Ellie and the girls standing in her doorway with their one bag and read the whole story in 3 seconds flat. "Mail-order bride?" "Yes, ma'am." "Bridgers?" "If you'll have me." Ada's eyebrows went up. She came around the counter and knelt in front of the girls. "What are your names, sweethearts?" "I'm Josie. This is Annie. She doesn't talk to people she doesn't know." "Smart girl. Most people ain't worth talking to." Ada stood. "You 3 look like you haven't had a hot meal in a week. Come on back. I've got stew and biscuits." After the girls fell asleep in Ada's spare room, Ellie sat on the back porch. Ada brought 2 cups of coffee and sat beside her. "How much did Calloway lie about?" "Everything." Ellie wrapped her hands around the cup. "He told Bridger I was 25, no children, well-spoken, refined. A perfect frontier wife." "And the truth?" 29, 2 daughters. I stutter when I'm scared." Ellie paused. "My husband died 2 years ago drinking in a mine shaft. His family blamed me for the bad luck and threw us out. My father saw an opportunity to get rid of me permanently." Ada sipped her coffee. "What can you do?" "Cook for a crew, keep a house, tend livestock, sew, preserve food, treat injuries with herbs. I can keep accounts and handle a rifle." "Can you be honest with a man who's had enough lies to last him a lifetime?" "It's all I know how to do." Ada was quiet for a while. "Sam Bridger showed me those letters 3 months ago, asked what I thought. I told him nobody that perfect agrees to marry a stranger in the mountains. He wanted to believe it anyway. Is he going to send us away?" "Honestly, I don't know. Sam's a good man, fair. But he came back from the war carrying things he don't show nobody. He asked for a wife, not a family. Finding out he's getting 3 people instead of 1, and none of them matching the advertisement." Ada shook her head. "Could go either way. What happened to him in the war? That's his story to tell. But I'll say this, he ain't broken. He's just been put together different than most folks expect." Ellie looked up at the stars, more than she'd ever seen in Tennessee. "Ada, if he sends us away, can I work here? At the store? I'll do anything. I just need somewhere safe for my girls." Ada reached over and squeezed her hand. "Let's not borrow trouble. But if it comes to that, you've got a place." Ellie's throat closed. A stranger in a territory she'd never seen had just offered her more than her own blood ever had. "Thank you. Thank me after you've met Sam Bridger. He ain't easy." "Neither am I." Ada smiled for the first time. "No, ma'am, I can see that." Morning came hard and bright. Ada loaded the supply wagon while Ellie dressed the girls. Josie braided Annie's hair. Annie held her rag doll and stared at nothing. "Mama, you're shaking," Josie said. "I'm fine." You stutter when you say fine. That means you're not fine. Ellie knelt down and took both her daughter's hands. Listen to me. Whatever happens today, we stay together. If this man wants us, good. If he doesn't, we figure out the next thing. But we don't fall apart. We don't beg. We stand up straight and we show him who we are. Understood? Josie nodded. Annie didn't respond, but her grip on Ellie's hand tightened. The ride up took 3 hours. The road climbed through forests and meadows, a creek running alongside, loud and cold. Ellie barely noticed. Her heart was hammering so hard she could feel it in her teeth. Then the trees opened, and there it was, a ranch spread across a mountain valley. Log house, corrals, cattle in the far meadow, a bunkhouse, a barn, a garden gone half wild. A man stepped out of the barn, tall, dark hair going gray at the temples, broad across the shoulders. He moved with the careful steadiness of someone who'd learned not to waste a single motion. He carried a rope in his left hand. His right hand hung at his side, and Ellie noticed his fingers twitch. Once, twice, like they couldn't quite stay still. He stopped when he saw the wagon, stopped harder when he saw Ellie, stopped dead when he saw Josie and Annie. Ada called out from the driver's seat. "Morning, Sam. Brought your supplies and your bride." Samuel Bridger didn't move. His eyes went from Ellie to Josie to Annie. Stayed on Annie's face, the tear tracks, the death grip on the rag doll. Then moved back to Ellie. Letters said no children. His voice was low, rough, like rocks at the bottom of a river. Ellie climbed down. Her legs shook, but she locked her knees. She lifted Annie to the ground, helped Josie down, stood straight. "The letters said a lot of things, Mr. Bridger." The stutter, right on time, right when she needed it least. None of them were true. How many weren't true? All of them. "My name is Eleanor Calloway Pratt. I'm 29. These are my daughters, Josephine and Annabelle. My father wrote those letters to get rid of me. I never saw them. I didn't know what they promised until 3 days before I got on the train." She stopped, breathed, fought the stutter down. "I can't give you what those letters offered. But I can work. I can cook for your crew, keep your house, manage your accounts, tend your stock. My girls work too. Josie knows horses, Annie's learning, and if that's not enough, say the word. We'll walk back to Elkhorn. I won't make a scene. I won't beg." Silence. Wind in the pines. A horse stamping in the corral. Annie pressed her face into Ellie's hip and made a small sound. Not a word, just fear looking for somewhere to hide. Sam's eyes dropped to the child. His jaw shifted. Something moved across his face, fast, too fast to name. He crouched down slowly until he was at Annie's level. He didn't speak to her, didn't reach for her, just held still, the way you hold still for a wild thing that might bolt. Annie peeked at him from behind Ellie's skirt. One eye, dark and wet and terrified. Sam reached into his vest pocket with his left hand. His right hand stayed at his side, the fingers still twitching. He pulled out a small carved wooden horse, no bigger than his thumb, held it out on his open palm. Annie stared at it. "It's a Mustang," Sam said quietly. "Made it last winter. She's been sitting in my pocket waiting to meet somebody brave enough to hold her." Annie didn't move. 10 seconds, 20. Ellie held her breath. Then Annie's small hand reached out and took the horse. She pulled it close, studied it, and looked up at Sam with both eyes. She didn't speak, but she didn't hide. Sam stood slowly, looked at Ellie. Those gray eyes carried something she hadn't expected. Not anger, not disappointment. Exhaustion, bone deep. The look of a man who'd been lied to so many times he'd stopped expecting truth. "You can stay tonight," he said. "Both rooms in the house are empty. The girls can have the one with the window. We'll sort the rest in the morning." "Thank you, Mr. Bridger." "Sam." "Thank you, Sam." He turned and walked toward the barn. His right hand reached for the door latch, and Ellie saw his fingers shake. He grabbed the latch with his left hand instead, quick, like he'd been covering that move his whole life. He didn't look back. Ellie picked up the carpet bag, took Josie's hand, balanced Annie on her hip. Annie was still clutching the wooden horse. "Mama?" Josie whispered as they walked toward the house. "He gave Annie a horse." "I saw." Mean people don't carve tiny horses and carry them in their pockets. No, they don't. Maybe this one's different. Ellie pushed open the door to the house. Sturdy, clean enough. A bachelor's home, simple and functional, with a stone fireplace and a cast-iron stove, and not a single soft thing anywhere. Maybe, Ellie said. Behind them, Ada Brennan turned the supply wagon around, watching the whole scene from the corner of her eye. She clicked her tongue at the horses and headed back down the mountain, a slow smile settling across her weathered face. "Well now," she murmured, "that man don't stand a chance." The first morning, Ellie woke before the sun. She lay still for a moment, listening. Annie breathed soft and steady beside her, the wooden horse clenched in her fist, even in sleep. Josie was curled on the other side, one arm flung across her sister's stomach. Ellie eased out of bed without waking them. The house was dark and cold. She found the kitchen by feel, located the stove, the kindling box, the matches. Had a fire going in 3 minutes. Found coffee, a grinder, a pot. Found bacon in the cold box, eggs in a basket by the door, flour and lard for biscuits. She worked fast and quiet. This was the language she spoke fluent. No stutter in her hands. The front door opened at 5:30. A man stepped in. Old, wiry, white hair under a battered hat. He stopped dead when he saw the kitchen. "Lord Almighty! Good morning, coffee's ready." He stared at her. "You're the mail-order bride." "I'm the cook. Sit down." "I'm Hank McAllister. Been working this ranch since before Sam was born." He removed his hat. "Ma'am, we've been eating Sam's cooking for 4 years. If that coffee tastes half as good as it smells, I might cry." "It tastes better. Sit." Hank sat. He wrapped both hands around the cup Ellie poured him, took a sip, and closed his eyes. "I ain't cried since my wife died, but this is close." The door opened again. A young man, maybe 19, lanky, with a mess of brown hair and a grin too big for his face. Behind him, 4 more men filed in. They all stopped at the threshold. "Is that bacon?" the young one said. "Billy Ward, mind your manners." Hank jerked his chin at Ellie. "This is Mrs. Pratt. She's cooking for us now." "It's Ellie, and yes, that's bacon. Sit down, all of you. Eggs and biscuits in 2 minutes." They sat. They ate. Nobody spoke for 5 minutes. Then Hank set down his fork and looked at Ellie with something close to reverence. "Ma'am, I don't know what arrangement you and the boss have worked out. Don't need to know, but I will tell you this. You keep cooking like that, you've got 6 men who will walk through fire for you." "I appreciate that, Hank. Anything you need, wood chopped, heavy lifting, critters dealt with, you holler." Billy raised his hand. "Can we have biscuits every morning?" "If you earn them." "Yes, ma'am. Whatever you say, ma'am." The men filed out. Ellie was washing dishes when Josie appeared in the kitchen doorway, Annie behind her. "Mama, it smells good in here." "Sit down. I saved you plates." Annie climbed onto the bench. The wooden horse sat carefully beside her plate. She ate without looking up. Josie ate fast, her eyes scanning the room. "This is a big kitchen, Mama." "It is." "Are we staying?" "We'll see." "You always say that." "Because it's always true." The front door opened. Sam stood there, hat in hand. He looked at Ellie, then at the girls, then at the clean kitchen, the washed dishes, the organized counter. His eyes moved to the stove, where a plate sat covered with a cloth. "That for me?" he asked. "You're the boss. You eat last or first, your choice." "Last is fine." He sat down at the far end of the table. Ellie set the plate in front of him. Bacon, eggs, biscuits, coffee. He ate without speaking. Josie watched him from across the table. Annie kept her eyes on her food. When he finished, he set down his fork. "Who taught you to cook?" "My mother. Before she died." He noticed the stutter. She could tell by the way his eyes shifted, not with pity, just with recognition. Like hearing a sound he understood. "Food's good." "Thank you." "Hands seem happy." They were hungry. Sam stood, put on his hat. "I'll be checking fence lines today. Hank's in the barn if you need anything. Billy's around somewhere." He paused at the door. "Your girls, the older one, Josie. She can come to the barn if she wants." "Got a mare that needs brushing. Gentle horse, good for kids. Josie's whole face changed. Really? Sam didn't smile, but something in his expression softened a fraction. Really? Ask Hank to show you which one. He left. Josie turned to Ellie, vibrating. Mama, can I? After you eat every bite on that plate and wash your dish. Josie demolished her breakfast in 30 seconds and was out the door before Ellie could say another word. Annie sat alone at the table, pushing eggs around her plate. The wooden horse stood guard beside her cup. Annie, baby, eat something. Annie shook her head. Ellie sat down across from her. You don't have to talk. You don't have to do anything you're not ready for. But you need to eat. Can you do that for Mama? Annie picked up a biscuit, took a small bite, set it down. Good girl. The morning passed in work. Ellie scrubbed the kitchen until it shone. She organized the pantry, mentally cataloging every jar and tin. She couldn't read all the labels, but she could smell, taste, feel the difference between flour and sugar, between salt and baking soda. Some labels she couldn't figure out. She set those aside, planning to ask Sam to read them, then stopped herself. Asking meant admitting she needed help, and the last time she'd asked a man for help, it had cost her everything. Annie followed her like a shadow, never more than 3 feet away. The wooden horse went everywhere Annie went. At noon, Ellie made sandwiches and carried them to the barn. The hands were surprised. Boss usually just lets us fend for ourselves midday, Hank said. Not anymore. She found Josie in the corral with the chestnut mare, Hank standing nearby. Josie was brushing the horse's mane with careful, deliberate strokes. The mare stood perfectly still, her head lowered, eyes half closed. She's a natural, Hank said quietly. Horse took to her in about 10 seconds. That mare don't like nobody. She barely tolerates me. Josie looked up. Mama, her name is Penny. She likes me. I can see that. Can I ride her? Not today. You learn to take care of her first. Then we talk about riding. That's what Hank said. Then Hank's a smart man. After lunch, Ellie found the garden. It had gone wild, choked with weeds. But underneath, she could see the bones of good planning. Tomatoes, gone leggy. Herbs, struggling through the weeds. A few squash plants still fighting for sunlight. She rolled up her sleeves and started pulling weeds. Annie sat nearby, arranging pebbles in a line, the wooden horse watching from a rock. That's where Sam found them when he rode in late afternoon. He dismounted slowly, favoring his right side, and stood at the garden fence. You don't have to do that. Garden's dying. It doesn't have to be. I planted it 2 years ago. Couldn't keep up with it. I can. Ellie pulled another weed, shook the dirt from the roots. My mother had a garden, taught me everything before she passed. Herbs, vegetables, medicinals. Give me 2 weeks and I'll have this producing again. Sam watched her work. Annie was watching him from behind a tomato plant, just her eyes visible above the leaves. She's quiet, Sam said. She stopped talking to strangers after her father died. Doctor in Tennessee said it was shock, said she'd grow out of it. Ellie's jaw tightened. That was 2 years ago. She talked to you? Sometimes, mostly to Josie. She talked to me this morning. Ellie's hand stilled. What? At breakfast, when you went to the stove. She whispered something to the wooden horse, said, Eat your breakfast. Real quiet, but I heard it. Ellie's eyes stung. She blinked hard and went back to weeding. She names things, talks to them instead of people. Smart. Things don't hurt you back. The words hung in the air. Ellie looked up at him. He was staring at his right hand, the one that wouldn't stop trembling. He caught her looking and shoved it into his pocket. Supper at 6? He asked. Yes. I'll wash up. He walked away. Ellie watched him go. Watched the way he held his right arm close to his body, the way his left hand did all the work, opening gates, untying reins, carrying the saddle. She'd been watching him do it all day. The compensation was so practiced, so seamless, that most people probably never noticed. Ellie noticed. She noticed because she'd spent 29 years hiding a stutter. She knew what it looked like when someone rearranged their whole life around a wound they wouldn't show. Supper was beef stew, cornbread, and apple cobbler from dried apples she'd found in the pantry. The hands ate like they hadn't seen food in a week. Billy had 2 plates of cobbler and looked like he might propose. Miss Ellie, if the boss don't marry you, I will, Billy said. Billy. Sam's voice was quiet, but the room went still. Sorry, boss, just saying this cobbler. Eat your cobbler and keep your proposals to yourself. After the hands left, Ellie put the girls to bed. Annie fell asleep fast, the wooden horse pressed against her cheek. Josie lay awake. Mama, Sam's hand shakes. I know. Why? I don't know yet. Is he sick? No, baby, I think he's hurt. From a long time ago. Like how you stutter when you're scared? Ellie brushed hair from Josie's forehead. Something like that. His hurt is in his hand, and your hurt is in your voice. So you're the same kind of broken. Josie. What? It's true. You both hide it. You both pretend it's not there, and you both think nobody notices. Josie rolled over. I notice everything, Mama. That's my job. Ellie kissed her daughter's hair. Go to sleep, wise girl. Mama? I think we should stay. Ellie turned down the lamp. She found Sam on the porch. He sat in a straight-backed chair, a cup of coffee in his left hand. The right lay on his knee, trembling faintly in the lamplight. Girls asleep? He asked. Yes. She sat in the other chair. Sam, we need to talk about what happens next. I've been thinking on it. And I don't know. He stared into the dark. I asked for a wife. I got a woman with 2 children and a history. I don't know. The contract your father signed ain't worth the paper it's on. Everything in it was a lie. I know. So legally there's no obligation, either side. I know that too. But you came all this way, you and those girls. He took a slow drink. Sending you back feels wrong. Keeping you here because I feel guilty feels worse. Then don't keep me out of guilt. Keep me because I'm useful. He looked at her. That what you want? To be useful? It's what I've always been. It's enough. Is it? The question caught her off guard. Nobody had ever asked her if being useful was enough. Nobody had ever suggested there should be more. What are you offering, Sam? Same thing I'd offer any housekeeper. Room and board, wages, fair treatment. You work, I pay. The girls can stay. Go to the school in Elkhorn when it opens in the fall. Come winter, if this isn't working for either of us, I'll pay your way to wherever you want to go. Enough to start fresh. That's more than fair. It's practical. And the marriage? Sam's jaw worked. There's no marriage. Not until there's truth between us. All of it. No more letters, no more lies. Just what's real. You want to know about me, and I want to know about you. He flexed his right hand, then closed it into a fist to stop the shaking. I saw you watching my hand today. Ellie's face warmed. I wasn't trying to... It's all right. You've got a right to know what you're dealing with. He held up his right hand. The tremor was visible even in the dim light. Shrapnel, Battle of the Wilderness, 1864. Took out a piece of nerve in my forearm. Hand works fine for most things. Holding a rope, gripping a saddle, swinging a hammer. But anything that needs steady fingers, he shrugged. Writing, buttoning a shirt, pouring coffee without spilling. Does it hurt? Not anymore. It just shakes. Doctor said it would stop. It didn't. He lowered his hand. People see it and they think I'm weak or drunk or simple. So I learned to hide it. Use my left hand when anyone's watching. I understand. I know you do. I heard your stutter. Ellie's chest tightened. It comes when I'm around men who remind me of my father. Loud voices, authority, anger. She forced herself to keep going. Edwin used to mock it, said I sounded like a broken record. My father told people I was slow. Teachers gave up on me because they thought I couldn't learn. Can you? I can read. I can write. I can do math in my head faster than most men I've met. The stutter is in my mouth, not my brain. Sam nodded slowly. My hand shakes. Your voice catches. Both of us spent our whole lives being judged for the one thing we can't control. Yes. Well, he finished his coffee. At least we understand each other. Silence settled between them, comfortable, the kind of silence that doesn't need filling. Sam? Yeah? Josie said something tonight. She said, "You're the same kind of broken. Your daughter talks too much." She talks exactly the right amount. The ghost of a smile crossed his face. First one Ellie had seen. It changed everything. The hard lines softened. The stone cracked. For just a second, she could see the man underneath all that armor. She might be right, he said. She's usually right. It's annoying. He stood, set his cup on the railing. Ellie, I need to tell you something about this ranch. All right? Man named Garrett Shaw owns the biggest spread in the territory. Been trying to buy my land for 3 years. I've got the best water source in the valley. Shaw's been buying up every ranch around me, squeezing out the smaller operations. I'm the last holdout. What's he done? Nothing I can prove. Cattle go missing, fence lines get cut, hands quit because they get better offers from Shaw's foreman. Sam's voice hardened. Last month, someone poisoned my well. I had to dig a new one. He poisoned your water? Can't prove it. Can't prove any of it, but I know. He turned to her. You need to understand what you're walking into. This ranch isn't just a home, it's a fight. And if you stay, you're in that fight too. I've been fighting my whole life, Sam. At least this time I'd be fighting for something worth keeping. He studied her for a long time. You really aren't what those letters promised. No, I'm not. You're better. He said it so quietly, she almost missed it. Then he stepped off the porch and walked toward the bunkhouse, his right hand shoved deep in his pocket, his shoulders carrying the weight of a war that never really ended. Ellie sat alone in the dark, listening to the creek and the wind and her own heartbeat. Better. He'd said she was better. She pressed her hands flat on her knees to stop them from shaking and realized the shaking wasn't fear this time. It was something else entirely, something she hadn't felt in so long she'd forgotten the name for it. Inside, Annie murmured in her sleep. Josie's breathing was deep and even. The wooden horse sat on the windowsill, guarding them both. Ellie went inside, checked on her girls, and lay down in the bed that wasn't hers yet, in the house that wasn't hers yet, on the ranch that wasn't hers yet. But for the first time in 2 years, she didn't plan her escape route before closing her eyes. She just slept. The next morning, Ellie woke with a lightness she didn't recognize. She lay still, testing the feeling like a tongue probes a new tooth. No knot in her chest, no map of exits unfolding behind her eyelids. Just the gray pre-dawn light and the slow rhythm of her daughter's breathing. Annie had kicked off the blanket. The wooden horse sat on the windowsill where Sam had placed it last night, its tiny carved legs catching the first pale glow. Josie was sprawled on her back, one arm dangling off the bed, her journal open on the floor where it had fallen. Ellie eased out of bed, pulled the blanket over Annie, picked up Josie's journal, and closed it without reading. She wasn't ready to see what her daughter had written about the man with the shaking hand. The kitchen was cold again, but the firewood Sam had stacked by the door was dry and split small. She noticed the kindling was already laid in the stove, the matchbox set on top. He'd done it before he went to bed, knowing she'd be up before him. She lit the fire and watched the flames catch. The gesture was so small, so deliberate, that it nearly undid her. Nobody had ever prepared a space for her. She'd always been the one preparing spaces for other people. She made coffee and stood at the window drinking it, watching the barn come alive. Hank's lantern moved through the stalls. Billy's voice carried across the yard, calling to someone she couldn't see. A rooster crowed from somewhere behind the chicken coop. The ranch was waking, and she was part of its waking. Not a guest, not a prisoner, a participant. The door creaked open, and she turned expecting Sam. It was Annie, barefoot in her nightgown, the wooden horse clutched under her arm. She walked straight to the table, climbed onto her chair, and set the horse in front of her. Then she looked at Ellie and waited. "Good morning, baby." Annie didn't speak, but her eyes said everything. She was watching to see if yesterday was real. If the man with the carved horse and the steady voice would still be the same today. "He's out in the barn," Ellie said. "You want to go see him?" Annie slid off the chair and walked to the door. She paused with her hand on the latch, looking back. "You go ahead. I'll have breakfast ready in 30 minutes. Annie nodded once and slipped outside. Ellie watched through the window as her smallest daughter crossed the yard in bare feet, nightgown trailing in the dust, and disappeared into the barn. She didn't call after her. She didn't follow. She let the child go. Because for the first time in 2 years, Annie was moving toward someone instead of away from everyone. Ellie turned back to the stove and started breakfast with hands that only trembled a little. When the hands filed in at 5:30, they found the table set and coffee poured. Hank took his usual seat. Billy sat with the enthusiasm of a man who'd dreamed of biscuits. But there was an empty chair at the far end where Sam usually sat, and Annie's chair beside it, and through the window, Ellie saw the barn door still closed. "Boss and the little one are having a conference," Hank said, not looking up from his coffee. "Saw them by Penny's stall. He was showing her how to hold a curry comb." "Penny's the mare," Billy added, just in case she'd forgotten. "I remember." Ellie set a plate of eggs on the table. "She named her after a penny she found in the dirt the day we left Tennessee. Said it was lucky." "Was it?" Hank asked. "We're here, aren't we?" The men ate quickly. Billy left first, eager to get back to the smithy. The others filtered out, each muttering some version of, "Thank you, ma'am," as they passed. Hank lingered at the door. "Mrs. Pratt, I ain't one to meddle." "I find that hard to believe." "Fair enough. But I've been watching Sam Bridger for 20 years. Watched him go to war a boy and come back a ghost. Watched him build this place with one hand tied behind his back, practically." He paused. "I ain't seen him look at a person the way he looks at your girls. And I ain't seen him look at a woman the way he looks at you. That's all I'm saying." He tipped his hat and was gone before she could answer. Ellie stood in the empty kitchen, the words settling around her like dust. She was still standing there when the barn door opened and Annie walked out, holding Sam's hand. Sam was carrying something in his other arm, a saddle blanket folded. He knelt down, spread it on the ground, and set Annie on it. Then he sat beside her and pointed at the sky. Ellie couldn't hear what he was saying, but she watched Annie's face tip up, following his finger. Watched her daughter's shoulders relax. Watched her small hand reach out and pat Sam's knee, quick and trusting, before returning to her lap. She turned away from the window and pressed her palms flat on the counter. Her hands were shaking again, but not from fear, from hope. And hope was more terrifying than fear ever had been. The morning passed in a rhythm Ellie was learning to love. She worked the garden until her back ached, pulling weeds, turning soil, finding the shapes of plants that had been smothered. She found mint and oregano and a scraggly rosemary bush that had somehow survived 2 winters of neglect. She transplanted them to a sunnier spot, watered them, and apologized out loud for letting them suffer so long. The plants didn't answer, but they looked greener by midday. At noon, she brought lunch to the corral where Josie was learning to saddle Penny under Hank's watchful eye. Annie sat on the fence, the wooden horse beside her, watching everything with the intensity of a general surveying a battlefield. Josie's hands were steady as she worked the cinch. "She's got your touch," Hank said, "and your stubbornness. She tried 3 times before she got the strap right. She gets that from her father." The words came out before Ellie could stop them. She hadn't spoken of Edwin in weeks. The name felt strange in her mouth. "He was a good teacher," she added quietly, "when he was present." Hank didn't push. He just nodded and walked toward the barn, leaving her alone with the girls. Josie mounted Penny with the careful grace of someone who'd been born to sit a horse. The mare stood still as stone, ears pricked forward, patient as a saint. "Walk her around the corral," Ellie said. "Don't trot until I say so." "Yes, Mama." Josie clicked her tongue, and Penny moved forward, her gait smooth and easy. Annie watched, her eyes tracking every step. Ellie sat on the fence beside her daughter and said nothing. The silence was full of 1,000 unsaid things, but for the first time, they were good things. That evening, after supper, Sam found Ellie on the porch. He sat in the chair next to hers, his coffee in his left hand, his right hand resting on his knee. The tremor was visible in the lamplight, but he didn't hide it. "Annie spoke to me today." Hank told me. "No, I mean she really spoke. Words, sentences." Sam's voice was careful, like he was handling something fragile. "She asked if the horse was lonely living in my pocket all winter." Ellie's throat tightened. "What did you say?" "I told her the horse liked the quiet, and that she wasn't lonely because she was waiting for someone worth waiting for." Sam looked at her. Then Annie said, "I was waiting for someone worth waiting for too." Ellie couldn't speak. She stared at the darkening valley, at the stars beginning to emerge, at the silhouette of the barn where her youngest daughter had found her voice again. "She's been waiting 2 years, Ellie finally said. "I know. She chose you." "I know." "Sam, do you understand what that means?" He set down his coffee and turned to face her fully. His right hand reached out, stopped an inch from hers, waiting. She took it. His palm was warm, the tremor passing through her skin like a current. "I understand," he said. "I understand that I've been living in a house that felt like a cave, and you turned it into a home. I understand that your daughter gave me a name today. Not Mr. Sam, just Sam. Like I'm family." He paused. "I understand that I spent 3 years believing this ranch was all I had left, and now I know I was wrong. This ranch is just land. You and those girls are something I didn't know I could have." Ellie squeezed his hand. The tremors matched. Two broken parts fitting together. "I don't know what happens next," she said. "Neither do I. That scared me yesterday. And today? Today it feels like a beginning." They sat in the dark, hands linked, watching the stars wheel overhead. The creek sang its cold, clean song. Somewhere in the bunkhouse, Billy was telling a story that made the men laugh. In the bedroom behind them, Josie was reading aloud to Annie, her voice rising and falling like a river. The wooden horse stood on the windowsill, its left front leg straight and true. And for one perfect moment the world was still. The trouble came 3 days later. Ellie was in the garden, harvesting the first tomatoes she'd managed to save, when she heard the hoofbeats. Fast, multiple riders. She straightened, wiped the dirt from her hands, and walked to the front of the house. A group of 5 men sat on horseback just inside the gate. They weren't ranch hands. They wore town clothes, clean and pressed, and the horses beneath them were glossy and well-fed. The lead man was tall, with a silver mustache and eyes that assessed everything he saw like a merchant pricing goods. "Mrs. Pratt, I presume?" "Who's asking?" "Garrett Shaw." He dismounted with the ease of a man who'd never had to hurry. "I've heard a lot about you. All of it true, I'm sure." Shaw smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I came to offer my congratulations. I heard you've made quite an impression on Sam Bridger. He's not a man given to hospitality." "He's been kind." "Kindness is rare in this territory, especially from a man like Sam." Shaw's eyes flicked to the house, to the garden, to the girls' voices coming from the barn. "He's got a lot to protect now. That's dangerous. A man with something to lose is predictable." "What do you want, Mr. Shaw?" "Direct. I like that." He stepped closer, and Ellie felt her shoulders tighten. "I want this land. I've wanted it for 3 years. Sam knows my offers. He's refused every one. But now he's got a wife and 2 children to think about. That changes things." "It doesn't change anything." "Oh, it changes everything. A single man can afford to be stubborn. A family man has to be practical." Shaw pulled a folded paper from his coat. "This is a water rights claim. I filed it this morning with the county. Your husband's deed predates the survey, but the county assessor has agreed to review it. That review could take months, during which time the water on this property is in dispute. You can't do that." "I can do a lot of things, Mrs. Pratt. I have friends in the right places, and I have patience." He tucked the paper back into his coat. "Tell Sam I'll be in touch, and tell him I'm willing to be generous. But generosity has a deadline." He mounted his horse, tipped his hat, and rode out with his men behind him. Ellie stood in the yard, her hands shaking, the stutter clawing at her throat. She didn't let it win. She turned and walked to the barn, where Sam was shoeing a horse with his left hand, his right hand braced against the stall. Shaw was here. Sam didn't look up. "I know. I saw him from the hayloft. He filed a water rights claim." "I figured he would." Sam set down the hammer and straightened. His face was unreadable, but his jaw was tight. "He's been threatening it for months. Now he's doing it." "What does it mean?" "It means we need a lawyer. It means I need to ride to Cheyenne and fight this in court. It means I'll be gone for a week, maybe longer." Sam looked at her, and for the first time she saw something raw in his eyes. "It means leaving you and the girls alone on this ranch with Shaw's men watching. We'll be fine." "Ellie, you don't understand. Shaw doesn't fight fair. He'll cut fences, poison wells, spook horses. He's done it before." "Then teach me how to fight back." Sam was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached into his vest pocket and pulled out the wooden horse. He held it out to her. "Keep this for me while I'm gone." "Sam, that's Annie's." No, I gave it to her. She gave it back to me last night. Said I should carry it so I'd remember what I'm fighting for." His voice cracked. "I don't need a wooden horse to remember. I've got her voice in my head. I've got you in my heart." Ellie took the horse. It was warm from his pocket, smooth from years of handling. She pressed it against her chest and nodded. "Come back." "I will. Come back whole." "I'll try." She kissed him then, hard and quick, before she could lose her nerve. His good arm wrapped around her, and for a moment the world narrowed to the smell of hay and leather and the steady beat of his heart. When he pulled back, his eyes were bright. "I leave at dawn. Then we've got tonight." She took his hand and led him toward the house, where the girls were waiting and the stove was warm, and the wooden horse sat on the windowsill guarding them all. The night passed in a blur of packing and promises. Sam gave Hank instructions, wrote a list for Ada Brennan, and held Annie on his lap while she traced the lines of his palm with her small finger. Josie gave him a list of things to bring back from Cheyenne, a new journal, a book about horses, and a piece of striped candy for Annie. "I'll do my best," he said. "You better," Josie replied, and Sam laughed. It was the first time Ellie had heard him laugh, a rusty sound, like a gate opening after years of disuse. At dawn, Sam saddled his horse. The hands gathered in the yard. Hank handed him a sack of provisions. Billy shook his hand solemnly. Annie stood apart, clutching the wooden horse that Ellie had returned to her last night. "You bring that back," Annie said. The words were clear and strong. Sam knelt. "I will." "You promise?" "I promise." Annie nodded, satisfied. "Then you can go." She turned and walked back into the house without looking back. Sam watched her go, then swung into the saddle. He looked down at Ellie, and something passed between them that didn't need words. Then he touched his hat, turned his horse, and rode toward the gate. Ellie watched until he disappeared over the ridge. Then she walked into the house, closed the door, and began the long work of waiting. The week passed slowly. Ellie kept the routine, cooking, gardening, mending fences, checking on the hands. She taught Josie how to keep the accounts. She taught Annie how to feed the chickens. She taught herself how to load Sam's rifle without her hands shaking. Shaw's men appeared twice. The first time they rode past the north pasture, slow and deliberate, counting cattle. Ellie watched from the barn loft, rifle across her knees, until they left. The second time they came at night. Ellie heard the horses an hour before dawn. She slipped out of bed, pulled on boots, and took the rifle to the front window. 4 riders sat at the gate, unmoving, watching. She lit a lantern and held it high so they could see her face. Then she set the rifle on the porch railing where the moonlight caught the barrel. The riders sat for another minute. Then they turned and rode away. "They're testing us," Hank said at breakfast, "seeing how long it takes us to break." "We won't break." "I know, but it helps to say it out loud." On the 5th day, a wagon came up the road. Ellie's heart seized, thinking it was Sam, but it was Ada Brennan, driving a team of mules and carrying a bundle of letters from Cheyenne. "Sam's fine," Ada said, climbing down before Ellie could ask. "He's got the territory's best lawyer working on the water rights. Should be resolved in a month." "A month?" "Best case. Worst case, it goes to trial, and Sam stays until winter." Ada saw Ellie's face and softened. "He's fighting for you. All of you. That doesn't happen overnight." "I know. I know." Ada squeezed her shoulder. "I brought supplies. And I brought news. Shaw's been indicted on federal land fraud charges. The governor's office raided his office yesterday. Found papers linking him to half the corruption in the territory. He's not going to be bothering you for a while." Ellie felt the tension in her shoulders ease just slightly. "Thank you." "Don't thank me. Thank the man who spent 4 days tracking down every witness who'd talk. That man's got a stubborn streak wider than the Missouri." Ada smiled. "You picked a good one, Ellie." That night, Ellie wrote a letter to Sam. She told him about the garden, about Annie's new words, about Josie reading the account book aloud to Penny. She told him about the riders and the rifle and the long nights of watching. She told him she missed him. She told him the wooden horse was back on the windowsill, waiting. She sealed the letter and gave it to Ada. "Get it to him fast. By sundown tomorrow, he'll have it." Ada left. Ellie stood on the porch in the dark. the stars sharp above her, the creek running steady below. Somewhere south, Sam was fighting for their home. Somewhere north, Shaw was losing his grip on the territory. And right here, in this house, two little girls were sleeping peacefully for the first time in 2 years. Ellie sat down in Sam's chair and let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, the world was finally bending toward her instead of breaking against her. The wooden horse watched from the windowsill, patient as a sentinel. And somewhere on the road to Cheyenne, a man with a shaking hand and a steady heart rode through the night, carrying a letter from his wife that he hadn't read yet. But he would. And when he did, he'd fold it carefully and put it in his vest pocket, right next to his heart, right where the wooden horse used to be, right where she was. Sam Bridger read his wife's letter 3 times before folding it and tucking it into his vest pocket. He stood at the window of the small boarding room in Cheyenne, watching the street below fill with wagons and riders and men in suits who moved with the hurried importance of people who believed the territory revolved around them. The letter felt warm against his chest, like a second heartbeat. Ellie's handwriting was careful and even, each letter formed with the deliberate patience of someone who had learned to write in secret, in stolen moments, when no one was watching to mock her. She'd written about the garden, about Annie calling the chickens by name, about Josie reading the account book aloud to the mare. She had not written about the riders in the night. She had not written about the rifle. Sam noticed the omission the way a carpenter notices a missing nail. He understood it. She was protecting him the way he protected her, by choosing what to carry alone. He pressed his hand over the letter and turned back to the desk where Henry Marsh was spreading papers across the scarred wooden surface like a general arranging troops. Marsh had been in Cheyenne for 3 days, building a case against Garrett Shaw that reached further than the water rights claim. He'd found tax records, land deeds, testimonies from ranchers too frightened to speak until now. Shaw's empire is built on sand, Marsh said, not looking up. Every piece of land he's acquired in the last 5 years has a paper trail that leads back to the same county assessor, the same surveyor, the same pattern of coercion. If we can prove even half of it, he loses everything. How long? Sam asked. The water rights claim is minor. I can have that dismissed in a week. The federal charges are bigger. The governor's office is already investigating. Shaw's going to be busy defending himself, which means he won't have time to bother you. He'll find time. Marsh looked up, his spectacles catching the light. You're probably right. Which is why I've filed a restraining order. Shaw can't come within 5 miles of your property without facing arrest. It's not perfect, but it buys you breathing room. Sam nodded. He wanted to feel relief. Instead, he felt a tightness in his chest that hadn't eased since he'd ridden away from the ranch. He saw Annie's face, serious and small, telling him to bring the horse back. He saw Josie's hand on the mare's mane. He saw Ellie standing on the porch, her hand raised in a wave she'd held until he disappeared. I need to get home, he said. I know, but there's one more thing. Marsh slid a telegram across the desk. This came from the Territorial Marshal's office this morning. They've arrested Shaw's foreman. He's been talking, giving up names, dates, locations. It's going to get worse for Shaw before it gets better. Sam read the telegram. The words blurred. All he could see was the road home. I'm leaving at dawn, he said. Marsh nodded, understanding. Then I'll have the dismissal ready by the time you return. Go home to your family, Sam. You've done enough here. Sam didn't sleep that night. He sat on the boarding house porch, his right hand trembling in the dark, Ellie's letter pressed against his chest, and watched the stars wheel overhead. He thought about the war, about the months in the field hospital, about the long years of silence afterward. He thought about a woman with a stutter who had walked into his life carrying 2 small girls and a bag of lies, and had turned out to be the truest thing he'd ever known. He thought about a wooden horse with a mended leg. He thought about a 5-year-old who had spoken his name like it was a gift. At dawn, he saddled his horse and pointed it north. On the ranch, Ellie was canning tomatoes. The kitchen was steam and heat and the sharp smell of vinegar. Annie sat in her chair, sorting beans into piles of good and bad with the methodical concentration of a judge weighing evidence. Josie was at the barn, as she was every morning, brushing Penny and talking to her about everything and nothing. The week since Sam left had stretched into an endless ribbon of work and waiting. Ellie had thrown herself into the garden, the kitchen, the accounts, anything to keep her hands busy and her mind quiet. She had stopped checking the ridge every hour. She had stopped jumping at every hoofbeat. She had learned to breathe through the anxiety, to push it down into the same place she kept the stutter, the place where she stored all the things she refused to let control her. But she still woke at dawn and looked at the empty chair at the far end of the table. She still caught herself setting the coffee cup in his usual spot before remembering he wasn't there. She still found herself listening for his voice, his boots on the porch, his quiet presence filling the spaces she hadn't realized were empty. Ada came by every other day with news. Shaw's arrest was imminent. The governor had appointed a special investigator. Ranchers who had been too afraid to speak were coming forward. The empire was crumbling. But crumbling empires could still strike out in their death throes. And Ellie knew, with the certainty of someone who had survived violence before, that the most dangerous moment was the one just before the end. That was why she kept the rifle loaded. That was why she checked the locks every night. That was why she taught Josie how to whistle a signal. One long note for attention, too short for danger. That was why she slept with one ear open and one hand on the windowsill where the wooden horse stood guard. The afternoon was hot and still. Ellie had just wiped the last jar clean when she heard the whistle. One long note, then too short. She dropped the cloth and moved. The rifle was by the door. She had it in her hands before she reached the porch. Josie was running from the barn, her face pale, her hand pointing toward the north pasture. "Smoke, Mama! North Ridge! A lot of it!" Ellie's blood turned cold. She ran to the edge of the yard and looked north. A column of gray smoke rose against the blue sky, thick and black at the base. It was too big for a campfire, too deliberate for an accident. "Hank!" she shouted without turning. "Hank, get the men! The north pasture's on fire!" Hank appeared from the barn, Billy behind him. They saw the smoke and didn't ask questions. Within minutes, every hand on the ranch was mounted, carrying wet blankets and shovels, riding toward the ridge. Ellie turned to Josie. "You stay with Annie. You stay inside. You don't come out for anyone except me or Sam or Hank. You understand?" "Yes, Mama." "If the fire comes closer, you take Annie and you ride to Ada's. You don't wait for me. You go." "Mama, no." "Josie." Ellie knelt and took her daughter's face in her hands. "You are the bravest person I know, and being brave means knowing when to run. If I'm not back by dark, you take your sister and you go. Promise me." Josie's eyes filled, but she nodded. "I promise." Ellie kissed her forehead, grabbed a wet blanket from the barrel, and ran for the horse Billy had left saddled. She had never ridden into a fire before. She had never ridden into anything before. But she swung onto the horse, found the stirrups, and held on. The horse was steady, trained for work, and it carried her toward the smoke without hesitation. The fire had caught in the dry grass of the north pasture, pushed by a wind that seemed to rise from nowhere. By the time Ellie reached the ridge, the flames were 40 feet wide and spreading fast. Hank was organizing a bucket line from the creek. Billy was beating at the edges with a wet blanket. 2 other hands were digging a fire break, their shovels flashing in the orange light. Ellie slid off the horse, grabbed a shovel, and joined them. The work was brutal. The heat pressed against her skin like a physical weight. Smoke filled her lungs until she coughed so hard she tasted blood. Her hands blistered through the gloves. But she didn't stop. She couldn't stop. This was her land now. Her home. Her fight. They worked for 3 hours. 3 hours of digging and beating and hauling water. The fire reached the firebreak and stopped, hungry and frustrated, chewing at the edge of the dirt line. They watched it burn itself out, inch by inch, until only embers remained. Ellie collapsed onto the blackened ground, her hands raw, her throat scorched, her dress ruined. Hank sat down beside her, his face streaked with soot and sweat. "Well," he said, his voice hoarse, "that was Shaw's parting gift, I reckon." "How do you know?" "Because I found this at the edge of the burn." He held up a piece of cloth, charred but still recognizable. It was a piece of a saddle blanket, embroidered with the double diamond brand. Shaw's brand. "He said it?" He or his men. The foreman's in custody, but Shaw's got a long reach. Even from a cell, he can still cause trouble. Ellie stared at the cloth. The rage came up so fast she had to clench her fist to keep it from spilling out. All that work, all that hope, reduced to ash and smoke. Is the pasture lost? The grass'll come back. Might take a year. But the cattle that were grazing there, we moved them to the south field yesterday. Billy's idea. Said the grass looked drier up north. Hank shook his head. Lucky kid. Not luck. He was paying attention. Ellie stood, her legs shaking. We need to post a watch. Every night. 2 men, rotating shifts. If Shaw's men come back, I want them seen before they get close. I'll set it up. And I want every hand armed. Ellie's voice was flat, hard. Not for show, for use. Hank looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded. Yes, ma'am. She walked back to the house, her boots crunching on ash. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and red that looked too much like the fire she had just fought. Josie met her at the door, Annie behind her. Mama, you're hurt. I'm fine, baby. Your hands. Ellie looked down. Her palms were blistered and raw, the skin peeling away in strips. She hadn't noticed. I'll wrap them. It's nothing. It's not nothing, Josie's voice broke. You could have died. Ellie pulled her daughter close, ignoring the pain in her hands. I didn't. I'm here. We're all here. I was so scared. I know. I'm sorry. Don't be sorry. Just don't leave us. I won't. I promise. Annie pressed against Ellie's leg, the wooden horse clutched in her hand. She didn't speak, but her presence said everything. Ellie held them both, standing in the doorway of a house that smelled of smoke, on a ranch that had been attacked, in a life that had never been easy. And she knew, with a certainty that burned brighter than any fire, that she would never stop fighting for this, for them, for him, for the home they had built from wreckage. That night, Ellie sat on the porch with her bandaged hands wrapped around a cup of coffee she couldn't hold steady. The stars were out. The embers in the north pasture still glowed faintly. And somewhere on the road from Cheyenne, a man was riding through the dark, pushing his horse harder than he should, driven by a letter in his pocket and a fire in his chest. He arrived at dawn. Ellie heard the hoofbeats before she saw him. She was on the porch, still in the same clothes, her hands wrapped in linen. She stood as the rider appeared through the gray light. Sam dismounted before his horse had stopped. He crossed the yard in 5 strides, took her face in his hands, and kissed her like he was drowning, and she was air. I came as fast as I could, he said, his voice ragged. Ada sent word about the fire. Who told you? Doesn't matter, I'm here. He looked at her hands, at the bandages. Ellie, I'm fine, they're just blisters. You fought a fire. We fought a fire. Hank and Billy and the others. I just held a shovel. He pulled her close, his face pressed into her hair, his whole body shaking. I should have been here. You were where you needed to be. No, I need to be here. With you. With them. He pulled back and looked at her. The water rights claim is dismissed. Shaw's under federal investigation. He's got bigger problems than our ranch now. But he set that fire. I know he did. And I'm done waiting for the law to catch up with him. What are you going to do? I'm going to protect what's mine. His voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of every battle he had ever fought. And I'm going to do it standing right here, next to you. The front door creaked open. Annie stood there, barefoot, her nightgown wrinkled, the wooden horse in her hand. She looked at Sam, her eyes wide. You came back. I told you I would. She ran to him. He caught her, lifted her, held her against his chest. She wrapped her arms around his neck, and for a long moment, no one spoke. Josie appeared behind them, her face breaking into a smile that lit the whole yard. Told you he'd come back, she said to no one in particular. Sam carried Annie into the house. Ellie followed, her bandaged hands pressed against her heart, watching the man she loved carry her daughter like she was the most precious thing in the world. Because she was. They all were. And he had come home. Dawn broke over the scarred ridge, and Sam Bridger stood in the ash of the north pasture, his boots sinking into the blackened earth. The fire had stolen 3 acres of grazing land and left the rest of the valley smelling like a spent campfire. He knelt, picked up a handful of charred grass, and let it fall through his fingers. Ellie found him there, her bandaged hands tucked into the pockets of her apron. Her dress was still streaked with soot from the day before, and she had circles under her eyes that spoke of a night without sleep. But she stood straight, and when she looked at the burn, she didn't flinch. "It'll grow back," she said. "I know. The cattle are safe. Billy moved them before the fire caught." "I heard." Sam stood and turned to face her. The morning light caught the gray in his hair, the lines around his eyes. He looked older than he had a week ago, but there was something else in his face now, something that hadn't been there before. A lightness, buried deep, but present. "I should have been here," he said. "You were fighting our fight in Cheyenne. That was just as important. It doesn't feel that way." "It is." She walked to him and took his hand, the right one, the one that trembled. "You came back. That's what matters." He pulled her close, and they stood together in the ash, two people holding each other up while the ranch woke around them. The hands emerged from the bunkhouse, moving slow and tired. Hank was already at the barn, assessing damage. Billy was checking the fence line. Josie appeared in the yard, leading Penny by the halter. Annie followed, the wooden horse tucked under her arm. She stopped when she saw Sam and Ellie standing together, her small face unreadable. Then she walked to them, reached up, and placed the wooden horse in Sam's vest pocket. "You keep it now," she said. "You're home." Sam's throat tightened. He knelt and looked at her, this child who had given him her most precious thing twice now. "I'll keep it forever," he said. Annie nodded, satisfied, and walked back toward the house. Josie watched her sister go, then looked at Sam. "She missed you." "I missed her too. She slept with the horse on the windowsill every night, said it was watching for you." Sam's jaw worked. He couldn't speak. Ellie squeezed his hand, and they followed the girls inside. The morning passed in the slow rhythm of recovery. Sam inspected every building, every fence, every animal. He found the fire had come within 50 yards of the barn, stopped only by the fire break the hands had dug. He found the well untouched, the water clear. He found the garden charred at the edges but salvageable. Ellie had saved most of it. At noon he gathered the hands in the yard. His voice carried across the silence. "I'm not going to pretend that was an accident. Shaw set that fire. He can't touch us directly, so he's burning what we've built. But I want you all to know something. We're not leaving. We're not selling. We're not breaking. This is our land, and we're going to hold it." He looked at each man in turn. "Any of you want to leave? I understand. Shaw's got a long reach, no hard feelings. But if you stay knowing we're in this together." No one moved. Billy spoke first. "I ain't going nowhere, boss. Miss Ellie's biscuits alone are worth the fight." A ripple of laughter moved through the men. Hank nodded. "We stay." The others echoed him. Sam felt something crack open in his chest. He had spent years building this ranch alone, believing he could do it without anyone. He had been wrong. "Then let's get to work," he said. That evening, after the hands had eaten and the girls were in bed, Sam found Ellie on the porch. The stars were coming out, sharp and cold. He sat beside her, his coffee in his left hand, his right hand resting on his knee. She reached over and took it, feeling the familiar tremor. "Ellie," he said, "I want to marry you. For real. Not because of a contract or a land dispute or anything except that I love you and I want to spend my life with you and those girls." She looked at him. "You already asked me." "I know, but the first time was in the middle of a war. This time I'm asking in peace. I want it to mean something. I want it to be a beginning, not a defense." She smiled, and it reached her eyes in a way he had never seen before. "Yes." "Just yes?" "Just yes. That's all you need." He kissed her there on the porch, with the stars overhead and the creek below, and the wooden horse in his pocket, warm against his heart. The wedding was set for Saturday. Ada arrived with a dress she had sewn herself, a simple calico the color of cream, with lace at the collar and buttons carved from bone. "It was my mother's," Ada said, holding it up. She would have wanted it to be worn by someone who deserved it. Ellie touched the fabric. It was soft and worn and smelled of cedar. "I can't take this." "You can and you will. I've buried 2 husbands in that dress. It's time it saw a wedding instead of a funeral." Ellie laughed, a sound that surprised her. She put on the dress and Ada buttoned the back. Josie stood in the doorway, her eyes wide. "You look pretty, Mama." "Thank you, baby." "Annie says you look like a queen." Ellie looked at Annie, who was sitting on the bed, the wooden horse in her lap. "Tell her thank you. She says you're welcome." The ceremony was at sunset, on the rise behind the house where Sam's mother was buried. The hands stood in a semicircle, hats in hands. Hank had cleaned his boots. Billy had slicked his hair down with water, which was the most preparation he had given anything in his life. Ada stood beside Ellie, and Josie stood beside Sam, holding his left hand. Annie stood between them, clutching the wooden horse. Reverend Thomas had ridden up from Elkhorn. He opened his worn Bible and read the words that had been read 1,000 times before. But they felt new, carved fresh for this moment. Sam's voice was steady when he said his vows. Ellie's caught only once, on the word cherish, and she pushed through it like she pushed through everything. When the Reverend said they could kiss, Sam leaned down and kissed her gently, as if she were made of light. Annie held up the wooden horse, and Josie clapped, and Billy let out a whoop that scared the horses in the corral. Ada wiped her eyes and pretended she had dust in them. Hank shook Sam's hand and then hugged Ellie, which surprised everyone, including himself. The wedding supper was a feast. Ellie had been cooking for 2 days. There was roast beef and potatoes and green beans and biscuits and 3 pies, apple and wild berry, and a custard that Billy claimed was the best thing he had ever tasted. The men ate until they couldn't move, and then they ate more. Josie stayed up past her bedtime, sitting on Sam's knee, telling him about the fire, and how Mama had grabbed the rifle, and how she had never been so scared or so proud. Sam listened to every word, his hand resting on her shoulder. Annie fell asleep in Ellie's lap, the wooden horse clutched to her chest, her small face peaceful. Ellie looked around the room at the men who had become her family, at her daughters, safe and alive, at the man who had married her twice in 1 month. She felt a fullness that was almost too much to bear. "What are you thinking?" Sam asked, his voice low. "That I never believed I could have this. What I never believed I deserved." He took her hand. "You do. You always did." The night wore on. The hands drifted back to the bunkhouse. Ada kissed Ellie's cheek and rode home in the dark, humming a tune she had learned in another life. Reverend Thomas left with a plate of pie wrapped in a napkin. Sam carried Annie to bed, tucking her in with the wooden horse beside her. Josie was already asleep, her journal open on the floor. He picked it up, closed it, and set it on the nightstand. Then he returned to the porch, where Ellie was waiting. They sat in the dark, his arm around her head on his shoulder. The valley spread before them like a promise. 2 days later, the rider came. He was a boy, no older than 16, riding a lathered horse and carrying a telegram from Cheyenne. Sam read it in the yard, his face hardening with every word. Ellie came out, wiping her hands on her apron. "What is it?" "Your father." Sam handed her the telegram. Colonel Horace Calloway had filed a complaint with the territorial court, contesting the validity of Ellie's marriage. He claimed she was of unsound mind, that she had been coerced, that the marriage was a sham designed to defraud him of his rightful inheritance. Shaw's lawyers were representing him. A hearing had been set for 2 weeks in Cheyenne. Ellie read the words twice. Her hand started to shake, the stutter pushing at her throat. She swallowed it down. "He's lying. I know. He's always lied. I know. He can't do this. He can try." Sam took her hands, steadying them. "But he won't win. We have witnesses. We have Ada. We have the Reverend. We have a marriage certificate signed and witnessed. He has nothing but lies. Lies are all he's ever needed." Sam looked at her, his gray eyes steady. "Then we go to Cheyenne. We face him. We tell the truth, and we let the truth do its work. And the girls? They come with us. We don't leave them here, not with Shaw still out there." Ellie nodded. She folded the telegram and tucked it into her apron pocket. Then she walked into the house and began to pack. The journey to Cheyenne would take 3 days. They left at dawn, the whole family in Ada's wagon, with Sam riding beside them. Josie sat in the back with Annie, their small bag between them. Annie had the wooden horse in her lap. She had not let go of it since the telegram arrived. "Are we going to see the mean man?" Annie asked. She meant Calloway. Ellie had told her the truth, as much as a 5-year-old could understand. "We're going to see a judge. He's going to decide if the mean man gets to bother us anymore. Will Sam be there?" "Sam will be there." "Then we'll be okay." Annie said it with such certainty that Ellie felt her own fear ease, just a little. The road to Cheyenne was long and dusty. They stopped at noon to rest the horses, eating cold biscuits and drinking water from a canteen. Sam checked the revolver at his hip, a habit Ellie had noticed him doing more often. "You think we'll need that?" she asked. "I think we should be ready." They pushed on. The landscape changed from mountains to plains, the sky growing wider and the wind stronger. Late in the afternoon they passed a burned-out homestead, the chimney standing alone against the sky. Sam reined his horse close to the wagon. "Shaw's work," he said. 3 years ago, family left, never came back." Ellie looked at the ruins. She thought about the garden she had planted, the kitchen she had scrubbed, the chairs she had sewn cushions for. She thought about the fire in the north pasture. She thought about her father's letter and Shaw's money, and all the ways the world had tried to break her. "They won't win," she said. "Not this time." Sam looked at her. Her face was set, her jaw firm. She was not the woman who had arrived at his ranch with a stutter and a bag of lies. She was something else now, something unbreakable. "No," he said, "they won't." They camped that night under the stars, a fire crackling between them and the dark. The girls fell asleep in the wagon bed, wrapped in blankets. Sam and Ellie sat by the fire, their shoulders touching. "What if the judge believes him?" Ellie asked. "Then we appeal. We fight. We keep fighting until we win. And if we don't, then we find another way. There's always another way." He took her hand, the right one. The tremor passed between them like a current. "I didn't find you just to lose you, Ellie. I won't let that happen." She leaned into him, closing her eyes. She didn't sleep, but she rested, her head on his shoulder, the fire warming her face, the wooden horse safe in Annie's grip a few feet away. They reached Cheyenne on the 3rd day. The city was bigger than Ellie remembered, crowded with wagons and riders and people in a hurry. Sam led them to a boarding house near the courthouse, a clean place run by a widow named Mrs. Gable, who took one look at the family and gave them the best room at a discount. "You're the Bridgers," she said. "Heard about you. Heard about that snake Shaw and that traitor Calloway." She spat the name like it tasted bad. "You need anything, you ask. I'll be rooting for you." Ellie thanked her, her voice catching. She was not used to strangers being kind without wanting something in return. She was learning that the West was full of people who had been through their own fires and recognized the smell of ash on others. The hearing was set for the next morning. Sam spent the afternoon reviewing documents with Henry Marsh, who had agreed to represent them. Marsh was confident. "Calloway's claim is weak. He has no evidence of unsound mind, no medical records, no witnesses. He's relying on Shaw's influence and the hope that the judge will be sympathetic to a father's claim." "Will he be?" Marsh hesitated. "Judge Morrison is fair, but he's old. He believes in family. If Calloway plays the grieving father card well enough, then we play the truth card." Ellie spoke from the doorway. "The truth about what my father did. The truth about how he sold me. The truth about the letters." Marsh looked at her. "You're willing to testify to that?" "I'm willing to do whatever it takes." Marsh nodded. "Then we have a chance." That night, Ellie couldn't sleep. She lay in the narrow bed, listening to Sam's steady breathing, to the girl's soft sighs. The wooden horse sat on the windowsill, silhouetted against the gaslight from the street. She got up, padded to the window, and picked up the horse. It was smooth and warm, worn by handling. She thought about all the miles it had traveled, from Sam's pocket to Annie's hand and back again. She thought about the leg Sam had fixed, the crooked line that was now straight. She thought about how broken things could be mended, how even a trembling hand could carve something beautiful. She pressed the horse to her chest and stood at the window, watching the city sleep. Tomorrow she would face her father. Tomorrow she would tell a courtroom full of strangers the worst truths of her life. But tonight she held a wooden horse, and she was not afraid. The morning came gray and cold. Ellie dressed carefully in the calico dress Ada had given her, the one that had seen 2 funerals and 1 wedding. It felt right, wearing a garment that had witnessed grief and joy both. Sam wore his best shirt, the one with no patches. Josie had braided Annie's hair, and they both wore clean dresses that Ellie had washed in the boarding house basin. They walked to the courthouse together, a family of 4, holding hands. The courtroom was half full. Ellie saw her father seated at the front, dressed in a fine suit, his silver hair combed back. He looked older than she remembered, but the cruelty was still there, in the set of his jaw, in the way he didn't look at her. Beside him sat a man in an expensive coat who must have been Shaw's lawyer. Judge Morrison entered, and the room rose. The hearing began. Calloway testified first. He spoke of his beloved daughter, his concern for her welfare, his fear that she had been taken advantage of by a man who wanted her land. His voice was smooth and practiced, the voice of a man who had been lying for so long he no longer knew the difference. Then Ellie took the stand. She was trembling. Her hands gripped the edge of the witness box. The stutter was waiting in her throat, ready to betray her. She looked at Sam. He nodded. She looked at her daughters. Josie was holding Annie's hand. Annie was holding the wooden horse. She took a breath. "My name is Eleanor Ruth Calloway Bridger. I am 29 years old. I have 2 daughters, Josephine and Annabelle. I am married to Samuel Bridger, and I am here to tell you the truth." She told them everything. The lies her father had written, the contract she had signed under duress, the slap that had split her lip, the years of being called stupid and broken, the husband who had drunk himself to death, the father who had sold her to a stranger. She told them about the train ride and Ada Brennan and the ranch. She told them about the wooden horse and the chair Sam had built for Annie, and the way her youngest daughter had started speaking again. Her voice broke. The stutter came and went, but she did not stop. When she finished, the courtroom was silent. Judge Morrison looked at her for a long time. Then he looked at Colonel Calloway. "I have heard enough," he said. "This court finds the complaint without merit. The marriage of Samuel and Eleanor Bridger is valid and binding. Any further challenges will be considered harassment and dealt with accordingly." Calloway stood, his face red. "Your Honor, I protest." "Your protest is noted and dismissed. This hearing is adjourned." The judge rose and left the bench. Ellie sat in the witness box, her hands shaking, her eyes wet. Sam was there, lifting her to her feet, holding her. Josie was hugging her waist. Annie was pressing the wooden horse into her palm. "We won, Mama," Josie said. "We won." Ellie looked across the room. Her father was being escorted out by the bailiff. He did not look back. She watched him go, and she felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, no relief. Just a quiet, deep peace, like a door closing softly. "Yes," she said. "We won." They left the courthouse into the gray afternoon. The clouds were breaking, and a thin light was falling across the street. Ada was waiting on the steps, her arms crossed, a grin on her weathered face. "I heard," she said. "Couldn't have happened to a better pair." She hugged Ellie, then Sam, then knelt and hugged the girls. "Let's go home," Sam said. They rode out of Cheyenne as the sun broke through the clouds, casting long shadows across the plains. Ellie sat in the wagon, Annie in her lap, Josie beside her. Sam rode ahead, his silhouette sharp against the light. The wooden horse was in Ellie's pocket, warm and solid. She touched it, felt the smooth line of the mended leg. She thought about all the battles they had fought and won. She thought about all the battles still to come, and she smiled. The road from Cheyenne stretched long and golden before them, the sun painting the prairie in shades of amber and rose. Ellie sat in the wagon bed with Annie curled against her side and Josie leaning against her shoulder, all 3 of them swaying with the rhythm of the wheels. The wooden horse was warm in Ellie's pocket, and she kept her hand closed around it as if it were a talisman. Sam rode ahead, his silhouette sharp against the fading light, his right hand resting on the pommel of his saddle. He had not stopped checking the horizon since they left the city. Ellie watched him watch the distance, and knew he was waiting for the other shoe to drop. Shaw was still out there, weakened but not destroyed. Her father was gone, but his poison had left a residue. The victory in the courtroom felt real and hollow at the same time, like winning a battle in a war that was far from over. They camped that night in a hollow between two hills, sheltered from the wind. Josie gathered dry brush for a fire while Sam unsaddled the horses. Annie sat on a blanket, drawing shapes in the dirt with a stick. She was drawing a horse. Ellie watched her daughter's small hand move with concentration, tracing the curve of a neck, the line of a leg. The drawing looked like the wooden horse. It looked like home. "Mama," Annie said without looking up, "will the bad man come back?" "Which bad man?" "The one in the courthouse, the one who said you were broken." Ellie's heart clenched. She had not realized Annie had understood so much of the hearing. "No, baby, he's gone. He can't bother us anymore." "Good," Annie drew another line. "I don't like him." "Neither do I." "Sam doesn't like him either." "No, he doesn't." Annie looked up, her dark eyes steady. "Sam likes us." "Yes, he does." "He loves us." Ellie felt the words land like stones in still water. "Yes, baby, he loves us." Annie nodded and went back to her drawing, as if she had simply confirmed something she already knew. Ellie looked at Sam, who had come up quietly and was standing a few feet away. He had heard. His face was unreadable, but his eyes were bright. He sat down beside Annie, picked up a stick, and began to draw in the dirt next to hers. He drew a bigger horse, then a smaller one beside it. Annie watched, then added a third figure, a tiny one that could have been a foal or a child. They worked in silence, side by side, the fire crackling between them and the dark. Ellie sat with Josie and watched the two of them draw together, the man and the girl, building something in the dirt that neither of them would ever speak about, but would never forget. The next morning they reached the edge of the valley. The ranch lay below them, spread across the green bowl like a promise. The roof of the house was visible, the corral, the barn, the garden that Ellie had wrestled back from the weeds. Smoke rose from the bunkhouse chimney. Hank was already up, moving through the yard. The hands were emerging for the day's work. It was ordinary. It was beautiful. Sam reined his horse beside the wagon. "We're home," he said. Ellie couldn't speak. She just nodded and let the tears fall. The first week after Cheyenne was a slow return to normalcy. The ranch had survived the fire, but the scars remained. The north pasture was still black, though green shoots were already pushing through the ash. The cattle had been moved to the south field, and the hands were repairing the fence lines that had been cut. Ellie threw herself into the garden with renewed energy. She planted winter squash and late beans, coaxed the tomatoes back to health, and started a new bed of herbs near the kitchen door. She canned and preserved and dried, filling the pantry with jars of color that would feed them through the snow months. Annie followed her everywhere, the wooden horse now alternating between her hand and Sam's pocket. She had begun to speak more, short sentences at first, then longer ones. She asked questions about everything. Why did the sun set? Where did the creek go? Did the horses dream? Ellie answered each one with patience, marveling at the mind that had been silent for so long and was now making up for lost time. Josie had taken over the bookkeeping. She sat at the kitchen table every evening with a ledger, recording expenses and supplies in her careful handwriting. Sam had shown her once how to do it, and she had never needed to be shown again. She was 8 years old and running the administrative side of a working ranch. "She gets that from you," Sam said one night, watching Josie calculate feed costs. "The numbers?" "The stubbornness." Ellie laughed. "She gets the numbers from her father. He could add columns in his head faster than anyone I ever knew." "Before the drinking." Sam was quiet for a moment. "Do you miss him?" Ellie considered the question carefully. "I miss who he was before, the man I married. He died a long time before his body did. I'm sorry." "Don't be. He led me to where I am now. I can't regret that." Sam reached across the table and took her hand. The tremor was light today, barely noticeable. "I'm glad you're here. I'm glad I'm here too." The second week brought rain, a slow, steady drizzle that soaked the ground and filled the creek and turned the yard to mud. The hands worked in slickers, moving slow and deliberate. The girls stayed inside, playing games on the kitchen floor, reading books borrowed from Ada's store. Ellie baked. She made bread and pies and a batch of molasses cookies that disappeared before they had time to cool. The house smelled like warmth and sugar. On the third day of rain, a rider appeared at the gate. He was young, maybe 20, with a scar on his chin and a wet hat pulled low. He carried no weapon that Ellie could see, but she kept the rifle close when she opened the door. "Mrs. Bridger? Who's asking?" "Name's Thomas Webb. I work for the Territorial Marshal's office. I've got a message for your husband." Ellie called Sam, who came in from the barn, wiping rain from his face. He took the message, read it, and read it again. His jaw tightened. "Shaw escaped," he said. Ellie felt the floor drop beneath her. Escaped? Transferred to federal custody 2 days ago. Somewhere between Cheyenne and Laramie, he got loose, killed a guard. They think he's heading this way. The young writer spoke up. "Marshall says he's got a score to settle. He named your ranch specifically, said he'd burn it to the ground before he let you keep it." Sam folded the message and put it in his pocket. "Thank you for riding out. Marshall says reinforcements are coming, but it'll be 3 days at least. He said to warn you and to tell you to arm yourselves. We're already armed." The rider nodded, touched his hat, and rode back into the rain. Ellie stood in the doorway, watching him disappear. The rain fell steady and cold. "Sam, I know. What do we do?" He turned to her. His face was hard, but his eyes were soft. "We do what we've always done. We hold. We fight. We don't break." She nodded. She had expected nothing less. The next 2 days were a blur of preparation. Sam organized the hands into watches, 2 men on duty at all times. He stationed lookouts on the ridge and set a signal system using lanterns. He moved the cattle closer to the house and reinforced the corral. Ellie cleaned and loaded every weapon on the ranch. She showed Josie how to load the shotgun, showed Annie where to hide if the shooting started. Annie did not cry. She just picked up the wooden horse and held it to her chest. "It'll be okay, Mama," she said. "Sam promised." Ellie pulled her daughter close and breathed in the smell of her hair. She wanted to believe it. The 3rd day dawned clear and cold. The rain had stopped, leaving the world washed and sharp. The ground was still soft, which would slow riders but also make it harder to move quickly. Ellie stood on the porch with a cup of coffee, watching the sun rise over the ridge. Sam came up beside her. "Any sign?" "Not yet. He'll come today, if he's coming." "I know." She set down her coffee and took his hand. "Sam, if something happens—" "Nothing's going to happen. Listen to me. If something happens, I need you to know that I have never regretted a single day of this. Not the train, not the lies, not the fire. None of it. Because it led me to you." He pulled her close, his face pressed into her hair. His right hand trembled against her back. "Nothing's going to happen," he repeated, but his voice cracked. They stood together as the sun climbed higher, the valley spreading before them, silent and waiting. The attack came at noon. Ellie was in the kitchen, putting together a lunch that no one would eat, when she heard the shout from the ridge. She dropped the bread and ran for the rifle. By the time she reached the porch, the yard was alive with motion. Hank was shouting orders. Billy was running for the barn. Sam was already mounted, his rifle across his saddle. "How many?" Ellie asked. 10, maybe 12, coming from the south." Sam's voice was calm, but his right hand was shaking. "We've got 6 men, counting you and me." "That's 8. I don't count you." "You should." She lifted the rifle, checked the load, and walked to the fence line. The riders appeared on the ridge. Shaw was in front, his silver hair unmistakable even at a distance. He rode slowly, deliberately, like a man who had all the time in the world. Behind him, 12 men spread out in a line. They stopped at the crest of the hill, looking down at the ranch. Shaw raised his hand, and the line halted. He rode forward alone, stopping 100 yards from the gate. "Sam Bridger," his voice carried across the valley, "I came to make you one last offer. Surrender the ranch, and I'll let your family live. Refuse, and I'll burn everything you love while you watch." Sam did not answer. He looked at Ellie. She looked back. They had faced fire and lies and courts and cruelty. They had faced everything the world had thrown at them. They would face this too. Sam turned his horse and rode out to meet Shaw. He stopped 50 yards from the gate, his rifle resting across his saddle, his right hand visible, trembling. "I'm not surrendering anything, Garrett." "Then you're a fool." "Maybe, but I'm a fool with a rifle, a good woman, and 6 men who will fight for me. What do you have?" Shaw's face twisted. He reached for his revolver. The shot that came was not from Shaw. It was from the ridge behind him, a single rifle crack that echoed across the valley. Shaw's horse reared, and Shaw fell. The men behind him wheeled, confused. Another shot came, and another. A ragged cheer rose from the ridge, and Ellie saw a line of riders crest the hill, their guns raised. Ada Brennan was in front, riding a mule and brandishing a shotgun like she was born to it. The territorial marshal was beside her, his star catching the light. Behind them came the blacksmith from Elkhorn, the storekeeper, the reverend, half a dozen men Ellie had seen in passing but never really knew. They had come. The town had come. Shaw's men looked at the line of riders, looked at their fallen leader, and threw down their weapons. It was over. Ellie lowered her rifle. Her hands were shaking. Her legs gave out, and she sat down in the mud. Josie was there, pulling at her arm. Annie was there, pressing the wooden horse into her hand. Sam was there, lifting her to her feet, holding her against him, his body shaking as hard as hers. "You're okay," he said. "We're okay." "They came," she whispered. "The town came. Because you built something worth defending." He kissed her forehead, her cheek, her mouth, soft and desperate. "Because you showed them what a family looks like." Ada dismounted and walked over, her shotgun still smoking. She looked at Ellie, at Sam, at the girls. "Well," she said, "that was exciting." "Anyone got coffee?" Ellie started laughing, and once she started, she couldn't stop. She laughed until she cried, and then she cried until she laughed again. The wooden horse was warm in her hand. The sun was high overhead, and in the valley below, the ranch stood unharmed, waiting for them to come home. The marshal arrested Shaw and his men and took them away in chains. This time, there would be no escape. The townspeople stayed for supper, and Ellie cooked for 20. The hands ate with the townsfolk, sharing stories and laughter, building a bridge that would last. That night, after everyone had gone, Ellie sat on the porch with Sam. The stars were out, the creek was singing, and the wooden horse sat on the windowsill, its mended legs straight and strong. "We made it," she said. "We made it." "What happens now?" He took her hand. "Now we live. We work. We watch the girls grow. We grow old together." "Is that enough?" "It's everything." She leaned against him, and they sat together in the dark, listening to the sounds of the ranch settling into peace. Somewhere inside, Annie was asleep, the wooden horse beside her. Josie was writing in her journal, recording the day's events in her careful hand. The house was warm and full and safe, and nothing was ever going to take it away from them again. The morning after Shaw's defeat dawned quiet and cold, a frost settling on the grass like a clean sheet pulled over a wound. Ellie woke before the sun, as she always did. But this time she lay still for a long moment, listening. No hoofbeats, no shouted warnings. Just the creek and the wind, and the soft breathing of her daughters in the bed beside her. She reached over and touched Annie's hair. The child stirred, clutched the wooden horse tighter, and settled back into sleep. Josie was already awake, her eyes open, watching the ceiling. "Mama? I'm here. Is it really over?" "I think so." "The bad man won't come back?" "No, baby. The marshal took him away. He's going to be in prison for a very long time." Josie was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Good. I didn't like him." "Neither did I. Can we go back to normal now?" Ellie considered the question. Normal. She wasn't sure what normal meant anymore. The life she had known before this ranch felt like a story someone else had lived. The train, the lies, the fear, it all belonged to a different woman. The woman she was now had a home, and a husband, and a garden, and a place where her daughters could run without looking over their shoulders. "Yes," she said, "we can be normal." Josie smiled and closed her eyes. Ellie eased out of bed and padded to the kitchen. The stove was still warm from the night before. She lit a fire, put the coffee on, and stood at the window watching the light spread across the valley. The north pasture was still black, but she could see green pushing through the ash. The corral was full of horses. The barn door was open, and Hank was already moving inside. Sam came in from the bunkhouse, his boots heavy on the porch. He looked tired, but the tension had left his shoulders. He had not slept more than a few hours in the past 3 days, but he moved with a looseness that had been missing for weeks. "Morning," he said. "Morning." He poured himself a cup of coffee and joined her at the window. "Hank says the fence lines are holding. Billy's already out checking the cattle. Everything's quiet." "Good." Ada sent word. "She's coming up this afternoon with supplies." Ellie nodded. She wanted to say something about what had happened, about the fear and the relief and the gratitude, but the words wouldn't come. Sam seemed to understand. He put his arm around her, and they stood together, watching the ranch wake up. The next few days passed in a rhythm of recovery. The hands repaired the last of the fire damage. Ellie replanted the garden beds that had been trampled during the attack. Josie went back to her bookkeeping with renewed focus. Annie began talking more, asking questions, filling the silence that had lasted 2 years with a steady stream of wonder. She asked about the horses, the chickens, the clouds, the creek. She asked about Sam. "Why does your hand shake?" she asked one morning at breakfast. The table went quiet. Billy froze mid-bite. Hank looked at his plate. Sam set down his fork slowly. He looked at Annie, who was watching him with those dark, serious eyes. "I got hurt a long time ago," he said, "in a war. My hand never healed right." "Does it hurt?" "Not anymore." "Does it make you sad?" Sam considered the question. "Sometimes," he said, "when I can't do things I want to do, button my shirt, write a letter." Carve a horse. Annie thought about that. Then she slid off her chair, walked around the table, and placed the wooden horse in his hand. "You can hold this," she said. "It doesn't need buttons." Sam's hand trembled as he took the horse. His jaw worked. He pressed the horse to his chest and closed his eyes. When he opened them, they were bright. "Thank you, Annie." She nodded, climbed back into her chair, and continued eating her breakfast, as if she had just solved a problem that had been bothering her for days. Ellie watched the whole exchange with a hand pressed over her mouth. She did not cry, but it was close. Josie reached over and patted her arm. "She's good at that," Josie said. "Fixing things." "Yes," Ellie whispered, "she is." The weeks rolled on, and the ranch settled into the quiet work of autumn. The days grew shorter, the nights colder. Ellie and the girls harvested the last of the garden, filling the root cellar with potatoes and carrots and squash. Sam and the hands drove the cattle down from the high pastures, preparing for the fall market. The house smelled of drying herbs and wood smoke. One evening, a letter arrived. It was from Cheyenne, addressed to Ellie in a hand she did not recognize. She opened it with shaking fingers. It was from her sister Margaret. The letter was short. Their father had suffered a stroke a week after the hearing. He was bedridden, unable to speak, under the care of a hired nurse. Margaret wrote that she was sorry. She wrote that she had known about the letters, had known what their father was doing, and had done nothing to stop it. She wrote that she was ashamed. She wrote that Caroline had moved to St. Louis and had not written to either of them. She wrote that she had no right to ask for forgiveness, but that she wanted Ellie to know the truth. Ellie read the letter twice. Then she folded it carefully and put it in the drawer where she kept her mother's cameo brooch. She did not tell Sam about it that night. She did not tell him the next day. On the third day, she found him on the porch after supper and sat down beside him. "I got a letter from my sister." Sam looked at her. "Margaret." "Yes." "What did she say?" Ellie told him. She spoke quietly, her voice steady. When she finished, she looked out at the valley. "I don't know how to feel," she said. "I don't know if I'm supposed to forgive her, or hate her, or feel nothing at all." Sam was quiet for a long moment. "What do you feel?" "Tired. I feel tired. Like I've been fighting so long I don't remember how to stop." He took her hand. "Then stop. You don't have to decide anything tonight, or tomorrow, or ever. You can just feel tired and let that be enough." She leaned against him. "What if I never forgive her?" "Then you never forgive her. That's your right." "What if I want to forgive her, but I can't?" "Then you try. And if you can't, you try again later." She closed her eyes. "You make it sound simple." "It's not simple, but it is straightforward. You do what you can, and you don't blame yourself for what you can't." They sat in the dark, the creek and the wind and the distant lowing of cattle filling the space between them. Ellie did not know if she would ever write back to Margaret. She did not know if she would ever forgive her father or the life he had forced her into. But sitting here, next to a man who had learned to carve with his left hand so he could give a wooden horse to a frightened child, she felt something shift inside her. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But a willingness to let the future be what it would be, without carrying the past like a weight. The first snow came in early November. It started as a light dusting, the kind that melts by noon. But by evening, it had turned into a storm. The wind howled down from the mountains, driving the snow horizontal, piling drifts against the barn and the house. Sam moved the hands into the bunkhouse early and made sure the livestock was sheltered. He carried extra firewood to the kitchen and checked the windows for drafts. Ellie made a pot of stew and a batch of cornbread. The girls played on the floor with the wooden horse and a set of carved animals Sam had made during the long winter nights before they came. By midnight, the storm was a full blizzard. The house creaked and groaned. The windows rattled. Annie woke crying, and Ellie brought her into her bed. Josie came too, and they all pressed together for warmth. Sam stayed up, banked the fire, and sat in his chair watching the flames. Ellie watched him from the bed. His face was half in shadow, half in firelight. His right hand rested on his knee, trembling faintly. He was tense, listening. "Sam," she said. "Come to bed. I should keep the fire going. The fire will keep itself. Come to bed." He hesitated, then stood and walked to the bed. He lay down on the edge, and the children shifted, making room. Annie reached out in her sleep and grabbed his hand, the trembling one. She held it against her chest and sighed. Sam looked at Ellie over the children's heads. His eyes were bright in the firelight. "This is what I was fighting for," he said. "All those years. I didn't know it, but this is what I was fighting for." She reached across and touched his face. "I know." They lay there as the storm raged outside, the four of them together, warm and safe. The wooden horse stood on the windowsill, its mended leg catching the firelight, watching over them all. The blizzard lasted 3 days. They were snowed in, unable to reach the barn or the bunkhouse. Sam dug a tunnel to the woodpile. Ellie rationed the food carefully. The girls played and read and slept. Time slowed, stretched, became something measured in meals and firewood, and the shifting light outside the frosted windows. On the second day, Annie asked to hear a story. Not a book, but a real story. Sam looked at Ellie. "You tell it," she said. He was quiet for a moment, then began. "There was a man who went to war when he was young. He thought he was going to be a hero. He thought he was going to do something important. But war isn't like that. War is loud and dirty and scared. And one day, something exploded near him, and he woke up in a hospital with a hand that wouldn't stop shaking." He held up his right hand. Annie watched it tremble. "The man thought his life was over. He thought he was useless. He went home and built a ranch, but the ranch was just a place to hide. He was alone for a long time." "Then what happened?" Annie asked. "Then one day a woman came. She had 2 little girls and a bag of lies. But the lies turned out to be the truest things he had ever heard, and the little girls turned out to be the reason his hand stopped feeling broken." He looked at Annie. "The end." Annie frowned. "That's not a story. That's just what happened." Sam laughed, a real laugh, deep and surprised. "I suppose it is. Tell a better story." "I don't know any better stories." "Tell about a horse that could fly." Sam thought for a moment. "There was a horse that could fly." She was the color of moonlight, and her mane was made of stars. She lived at the top of the highest mountain, where the snow never melts and the wind never stops. He told the story for an hour, making it up as he went. The flying horse rescued a lost child and carried her across the sky, over plains and rivers and forests, until she found her home. The child was not afraid because the horse was warm and steady, and she knew that as long as she held on, she would be safe. Annie listened without moving. When Sam finished, she said, "The flying horse is you." Sam did not answer. He just reached out and touched the wooden horse on the windowsill. "And the little girl," he said, "is you." On the third day, the storm broke. The sun came out, blinding on the fresh snow. The world was white and clean and silent. Sam dug a path to the barn, where the horses were safe and the cattle had weathered the storm. The hands emerged from the bunkhouse, blinking in the light. Billy started throwing snowballs at Hank before he had even cleared the door. Life returned. Ellie stood on the porch, watching the steam rise from the barn roof, watching the children build a snowman in the yard, watching Sam cross the white expanse toward her, his breath clouding in the cold. He reached her and took her hand. "Winter's here," he said. "I know. It's going to be long. I know. Are you ready?" She looked at him, at the ranch, at her daughters laughing in the snow. "I'm ready for anything." He kissed her, cold and quick. Then he went to help the hands dig out the chicken coop. Ellie went inside to start the fire. The wooden horse sat on the windowsill, the morning light catching the grain of its carved mane. It had survived fire and storm and war and lies. It had traveled from a trembling hand to a silent child and back again. It was just a piece of wood, but it held the whole story. Winter settled over the valley like a held breath. The snow that had fallen during the blizzard did not melt. It crusted, refroze, and was layered with fresh falls until the world was a solid white expanse stretching from the mountains to the plains. The ranch became an island, connected to the outside only by the thin thread of the road that Sam and the hands kept shoveled with grim determination. Ellie had never known cold like this. The Tennessee winters of her childhood were mild, damp things that came and went without leaving a mark. This cold was a presence. It pressed against the walls, seeped through the window frames, clung to the corners of rooms where the fire could not reach. She learned to dress in layers, to keep her hands wrapped in wool, to move quickly between the house and the barn. The girls adapted faster than she did. Josie took to the snow like she had been born in it, building forts and tunneling through drifts. Annie emerged from her silence with the snow, speaking more each day, her voice growing stronger as the world outside grew quieter. She still carried the wooden horse everywhere, but now she talked to it out loud, telling it stories she invented as she went. Sam spent his days in the barn and the bunkhouse, checking on the livestock, repairing tack, keeping the hands busy with projects that would last through the long months. He came in at dusk, stamping snow from his boots, his face ruddy from the cold. Ellie would have supper waiting, and they would eat together, the four of them, the fire crackling, the wind howling outside. It was a simple life. It was a good life. But the isolation wore on everyone in different ways. Billy grew restless, picking fights with the other hands out of boredom. Hank retreated into his own silence, speaking only when necessary. Even Josie, usually steady, began to snap at her sister over small things. Ellie felt the tension building, a pressure that had nowhere to go. She found herself standing at the window more often, staring at the white horizon, wondering what was out there beyond the snow. She had not written back to Margaret. The letter sat in the drawer, unanswered. She thought about it almost every day, but the words would not come. What could she say? That she forgave her sister? She was not sure she did. That she understood? She did not understand how someone could watch their father destroy their sibling and do nothing. She did not understand how Margaret could have written those beautiful, lying letters while knowing what they would cost. But she also remembered Margaret braiding her hair when they were children. She remembered the summer they had spent at their grandmother's house, picking berries and laughing at nothing. She remembered that forgiveness was not a feeling but a choice, and that the choice could take time. She was still trying to make it. One night in late January, Annie woke up crying. Not the soft whimper of a nightmare, but a raw, ragged sound that cut through the dark like a knife. Ellie was out of bed before she was fully awake, crossing the cold floor to the girls' room. She found Annie sitting up in bed, her face flushed, her eyes glassy. She was burning with fever. Ellie's hands went cold. She had seen fever before. She had seen what it could do. She had watched her mother die of a fever that had come on just like this, fast and fierce and unforgiving. "Sam!" she called, her voice steady even though her heart was pounding. "Sam, get up!" He was there in seconds, his shirt half-buttoned, his hair mussed. He took one look at Annie and went still. "How bad?" "I don't know. She's burning up." He reached down and touched Annie's forehead. She flinched away, moaning. "I'll get the medicine box." Cold cloths, whiskey for her chest. He moved to the door, then stopped. "Ellie, she's going to be all right." You don't know that. I know we're going to fight for her. That's all any of us can do." He was gone, and Ellie was left alone with her daughter, who was shivering and burning and so small in the dim light. She held Annie's hand, the one that was always clutching the wooden horse, and she prayed. She prayed to a God she had stopped believing in years ago, prayed with words that came from somewhere deeper than faith, from the raw desperation of a mother who would do anything to save her child. "Please," she whispered, "please don't take her. She just started talking again. She just started living." The next 3 days were the longest of Ellie's life. The fever raged, spiking and falling and spiking again. Annie drifted in and out of consciousness, muttering words that made no sense, reaching for things that were not there. Josie stayed in the doorway, her face pale, her hands clutching the frame. She did not cry. She was too old to cry, she told herself, but she shook. Sam barely left the room. He changed the cold cloths, held Annie down when she thrashed, forced spoonfuls of broth between her cracked lips. His right hand trembled worse than ever, but he did not stop. He could not stop. On the third night, the fever broke. Ellie was dozing in the chair beside the bed when she felt a small hand touch her face. She opened her eyes. Annie was looking at her. Her eyes were clear. Her skin was cool. "Mama," she said, "I'm thirsty." Ellie burst into tears. She gathered Annie in her arms, held her against her chest, and sobbed. Sam came in from the kitchen and stood in the doorway. His face was haggard, his eyes rimmed with red. He watched Ellie hold their daughter, and he did not try to hide the tears running down his own face. Josie pushed past him and climbed onto the bed, wrapping her arms around both of them. They stayed like that, the four of them, tangled together, breathing the same air, alive. When Annie was strong enough to sit up, she looked around the room. She saw the wooden horse on the nightstand, where Sam had placed it when she first fell ill. She reached for it, and Sam handed it to her. She held it for a moment, then looked at him. "You stayed," she said. "Every night. You stayed. I'm not going anywhere, little one." She held out the horse to him. "You keep it, for when I'm not here." Sam took the horse. His hand shook. He could not speak. He just nodded and put it in his pocket, where it had lived before she came, where it would live now, carrying the weight of her trust. The recovery was slow. Annie was weak, her body hollowed out by the fever. But she was alive, and every day she grew stronger. Ellie fed her broth and bread and the last of the honey from the pantry. Sam read to her from the only book in the house, a worn volume of poems that had belonged to his mother. Josie sat with her, telling her about the horses, the chickens, the plans for spring. The house, which had been tight with fear, loosened into relief. The hands, who had been quiet and grim during the illness, began to laugh again. Billy made a joke at breakfast, and Hank actually smiled. The tension that had been building for weeks dissolved like frost in the morning sun. One evening, when Annie was well enough to sit at the table for supper, she looked around at the faces gathered there. Her mother, her sister, Sam, Hank, Billy. The other hands, whose names she was still learning. She looked at the fire, the lamp, the snow piled against the windows. She looked at Sam. "Sam," she said, "can I call you something? What would you like to call me?" She thought about it. "Pa," she said. The word hung in the air. Sam set down his fork. His right hand reached across the table, palm up. Annie put her small hand in his. "Yes," he said, his voice rough. "You can call me that." Ellie pressed her hand over her mouth. Josie grabbed her arm under the table. The hands looked at their plates, suddenly very interested in their food. Billy blew his nose loudly and pretended it was a cough. No one said anything. They did not need to. The word had been spoken. It had been received. It had changed everything. That night, after the girls were asleep, Ellie and Sam sat on the porch, bundled in blankets, watching the stars. The cold was bitter, but neither of them wanted to go inside. "She called you Pa," Ellie said. "I heard. How do you feel?" He was quiet for a long moment. "Like I finally belong somewhere." "You always belonged." "No, I had a place. A ranch, land. But belonging is different. Belonging is being wanted, not just needed. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the wooden horse. She gave me this. Twice now. First when she didn't know me, then when she thought she might not make it. He turned it over in his hands. I don't know what I did to deserve her trust. You carved a horse. You fixed its leg. You stayed. That's all? That's everything. He put the horse back in his pocket and took her hand. Ellie, I want to adopt them. Legally. Make them mine in the eyes of the law, not just in our hearts. She looked at him. You're sure? I've never been more sure of anything. She leaned into him, her head on his shoulder. Then we'll do it. In the spring, when the roads open. In the spring. The stars wheeled overhead. The cold bit at their cheeks. The wooden horse sat in Sam's pocket, warm against his heart. And somewhere in the house, a little girl who had not spoken for 2 years was sleeping peacefully, dreaming of flying horses, calling a new name into the dark. Spring came slowly that year, the snow retreating inch by inch, the ground revealing itself like a story written in mud and meltwater. The creek swelled with runoff, roaring down the valley in a voice that drowned out everything else. The first green shoots appeared in the garden, tentative and bright, and Ellie knelt beside them every morning, touching the leaves like she was greeting old friends. The road to Cheyenne opened in April. Sam had been watching the weather like a hawk, waiting for the moment when the mud would be solid enough to travel. When the day came, he loaded the wagon with supplies and provisions, checked the harness 3 times, and stood in the yard with his hands on his hips, looking at the sky. We'll leave at dawn, he said. Ellie stood beside him, the girls at her skirts. Are you ready? She asked. He looked at her, then at Josie, then at Annie. I've been ready since the day she called me Pa. They left in the gray light of early morning, the wagon creaking under the weight of provisions and hope. Josie sat beside Sam on the driver's seat, asking questions about every bird and tree and rock they passed. Annie sat in the wagon bed with Ellie, the wooden horse in her lap, watching the world unfold behind them. She was quiet, but it was the quiet of contemplation, not fear. She had been talking more and more, her voice growing stronger with each passing week. She had asked Sam to tell her the flying horse story again, and he had, and she had corrected him when he got a detail wrong. The horse's mane was silver, not gold, she had said. I remember. Sam had looked at her, startled. You remember? I dreamed it. The trip took 3 days, but they were easy days, filled with the sounds of birds returning and the smell of wet earth. They camped under the stars, and the girls fell asleep listening to Sam tell stories about the ranch, about the cattle drives he had made as a young man, about the winter he had survived alone in a line shack with nothing but a sack of beans and a stubborn mule. You were alone a lot, Josie said. I was. Why didn't you find someone sooner? He was quiet for a moment. I didn't think I deserved someone. Do you think you deserve us now? He looked at her steady eyes, at the way she held herself like a woman twice her age. I think I'm trying to deserve you every day. Josie nodded, satisfied with the answer. That's good enough. Cheyenne was bustling with spring activity. The streets were full of wagons and riders, merchants calling out their wares, children running through the mud. They found a boarding house, the same one Mrs. Gable ran, and she greeted them like old friends. The Bridgers! Come in, come in! I heard about the adoption. About time, if you ask me. She bustled them inside, fed them a hot meal, and showed them to their rooms. The next morning they went to the courthouse. It was a different room than the one where Ellie had faced her father. This one was smaller, quieter, with a judge who had kind eyes and a voice that carried no judgment. He looked at the papers, looked at the family standing before him, and smiled. This is the easy part, he said. The law is clear. You are married. The children are yours by every measure that matters. I just need to make it official. He asked Ellie and Sam a few questions, asked the girls if they understood what was happening. Josie said yes. Annie just nodded, her hand in Sam's. The judge signed the papers. He stamped them with the seal of the territory. He looked up and smiled again. Josephine and Annabelle Bridger, you are now the legal children of Samuel and Eleanor Bridger. May this family stand strong for generations. That was it. A few words, a few signatures, and the family was made whole in the eyes of the world. They walked out of the courthouse into the bright spring sunlight. Josie was grinning so wide her face hurt. Annie was holding Sam's hand, and Ellie was holding Annie's other hand, and they walked down the street together, a family of 4. They celebrated that night at the boarding house. Mrs. Gable brought out a cake she had baked special. There was laughter and stories and a warmth that filled the room. Sam sat with Annie on his lap, the wooden horse in her hand, and he told her the story of the flying horse again, and she corrected him on the color of the mane, and he promised to remember next time. They returned to the ranch a week later. The valley was green, the creek running clear and strong, the north pasture showing new grass that covered the scars of the fire. The hands lined up in the yard, hats in hand. Hank stepped forward and shook Sam's hand, then knelt and looked at the girls. "Welcome to the family," he said, officially. Josie hugged him, which surprised him so much he didn't know what to do with his arms. Annie just looked at him and said, "Thank you, Mr. Hank." "It's just Hank," he said, his voice rough. "And you're welcome." The days that followed were a celebration of small things. Ellie planted the garden, and the girls helped, pressing seeds into the warm soil with careful fingers. Sam and the hands moved the cattle to the high pastures, and Josie rode with them, her own pony now, a gift from Sam that had made her cry for the first time in years. Annie began to read. She had been sounding out words for months, and now the letters clicked into place, and she read aloud to anyone who would listen, her voice rising and falling with the rhythm of the sentences. She read to Ellie while she cooked. She read to Sam while he mended tack. She read to the chickens, who did not seem to appreciate it but listened anyway. The wooden horse still went everywhere with her, but now it shared her pocket with a piece of chalk and a smooth stone she had found in the creek. She had not given it back to Sam since the adoption. She did not need to. She knew where he was. She knew he would always be there. One evening, as the sun set over the valley, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Sam and Ellie sat on the porch. The girls were in the yard, chasing fireflies. Their laughter drifted up like music. "We did it," Ellie said. "We did. I never thought I'd have this." "Neither did I." She leaned against him, and he put his arm around her. His right hand rested on her shoulder, and she felt the familiar tremor. It did not bother her anymore. It was part of him. It was part of them. "What happens now?" she asked. "Same thing that's been happening. We live, we work, we watch them grow." "Is that all?" "That's everything." She looked at the girls, at the fireflies, at the ranch that had become their home. The wooden horse was on the windowsill, where Annie had placed it before going out to play. The light caught the grain of the wood, the careful carving of the mane, the straight line of the mended leg. It was just a piece of wood. But it held the whole story, the story of a man who had been broken by war and healed by a child's trust, the story of a woman who had been thrown away and had built a home from the wreckage. The story of 2 girls who had learned that family was not about blood, but about the people who stayed. Ellie watched the fireflies rise and thought about all the miles she had traveled to get here. The train from Tennessee, the stagecoach to Elkhorn, the wagon up the mountain. She had arrived with a bag of lies and a heart full of fear. She had found a man who carved wooden horses in the dark, whose hand shook from wounds he never spoke about, who built a chair for a child he did not know he was getting. She had found a home. Sam shifted beside her. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "That I'm grateful." "For what?" "For the train, the lies, the fire, the fever, all of it." "Why?" "Because it led me here." She took his hand, the trembling one, and held it against her heart. "And here is exactly where I'm supposed to be." The fireflies rose and fell. The girls laughed in the tall grass. The wooden horse stood on the windowsill, watching over them all. And in the valley below, the ranch settled into the long peace of evening, the work of the day done, the promise of tomorrow waiting. This was not the end of the story. It was the beginning of every day after, and that was enough. This is Clint Dawson, and you've been listening to Frontier Heart Audio. Until next time, keep your heart open and your trails safe.